Welcome to Combat Zone with Ben the Bane Davis on Stadium.
Folks, welcome back to the Combat Zone. So happy to have you with us today. We've got a stacked episode featuring former boxing world champion Paulie Malignaggi as he makes his return to the bare knuckle boxing ring. And we also have some huge takeaways from last weekend's UFC card at UFC Rio. And as always, I've got some random stuff in the world of combat sports that I want to talk about with you. But before we get into all that, I got to tell you about my weekend. Now, of course, this was a interesting one here in State 48 because Arizona's experiencing the monsoon season, which is a lot of rain, kind of unfamiliar for the desert to be this flooded. You know, I don't think my city's built to handle this amount of liquid. So all of the streets have practically turned into a water park. And the big staple of October in Arizona is the AZ State Fair, right? This is a huge event, right? Usually garners about 1.5 million attendees over the 4 weeks that it's operational. And this year it's just been bad luck after bad luck. The rain is not going away. In fact, it feels oddly specifically targeting the AZ State Fair. I don't know what this event has done in the realm of climate impact, but God's taking out some punishment. And I was just there last weekend with my girlfriend and a buddy of ours, and one of the attendees, one of the managers of one of the places while we were there was sort of complaining. They were like, "Yeah, usually we get so many more people coming through than this, right? So make sure you tell all your friends and everything." And I'd be inclined to help the AZ State Fair's attendance in the deeply minimal way that I could, right? But the other issue with it that's not even associated with the mud everywhere is the price. Guys, I don't like complaining about prices too frequently, but golly, it's expensive. They do not make it easy to go to the AZ State Fair, and they kind of trick you. It's $10 to get in per person, which is, that's a layup. Come on, 10 buckaroos, that's Starbucks that we can forego for a day. And you get in, you think it's going to be all well and fine, and then you realize that every single thing that you want to do at the Arizona State Fair, it's going to cost you. There's going to be an expense associated, whether it's something as small as participating in the minor little games, the carnival tricks and things that they have, or the bigger rides that they've got. It's all going to cost you tickets, and the tickets are stupidly expensive. I'm thinking that over the course of probably 3.5, 4 hours that we were there, it might have rung up to the tune of $250. I think. I don't know if it went above $250, but I would not be stunned if it was around there for me. And then my buddy also dropped the same amount. And so now I get to the point where, look, we're talking about Disneyland prices, right? Let's cut the cheese right here. This is Disneyland prices. And I'm sorry, but this is not Disneyland quality of experience. This is a huge, huge difference. Yet the prices are near the same. So I kind of wanted to say to the guy who was complaining about the lack of attendees, look, you are asking for a premium price, but you're offering a stale product. This AZ State Fair isn't one that I would say is equal to, Tower of Terror or any of the other things that Disneyland has. Can't think of a single other ride that they've got off the top of my dome, but the comparison still stands. If you want to charge that amount, you have to have something of the same bar, and Arizona State Fair simply doesn't. So a bit of a expensive evening, but a fun one nonetheless, right? Fairs are always fun. And talking about fun, let's take it to the real meat and potatoes of today, which is the UFC Rio reactions. Now, if you are a fan of Charles Oliveira, this is probably the greatest day of your life. Do Bronx remains undefeated in Brazil. He's 18-0 in the country, 7 of those fights under the UFC's banner. And this might have been one of his best performances in the last couple of years, which is shocking because you think about Oliveira's advanced age. You think about the fact that Ilia Topuria just knocked him out cold in June. So I was anticipating a different version of Charles, maybe someone that's more hesitant, maybe someone that's, not interested in really engaging all that much. But I ate my words right away. Charles Oliveira pressures off the bat, pushes the short notice Gamrot up against the cage and keeps him there, right? And is not even afraid to strike at all. And look, I get that Gamrot doesn't have a ton of power. I get that that's kind of a criticism of Mateusz Gamrot, but let's not forget he had Dan Hooker hurt on a couple occasions, was going back and forth with the Hangman. So clearly, like, his stand-up's not terrible, and for Charles to completely disregard it and just push past him, finds the submission in the second round, was just awesome to see. It's rare in, I would say, this sport where you have feel-good type moments all that often, right? And Charles Oliveira bouncing back from his loss to Ilia Topuria in the fashion that he did in Rio, of all places, and then having a party in the favelas on National Kids Day in that country is just absolutely a feel-good moment. Loved everything about it. Welcome back to the win column. He asks for Max Holloway for the BMF title next. I think we should grant that expeditiously. But a thing that I don't know we should grant is Montel Jackson another opportunity at a top dog, at least in the near future. So 37-year-old Davison Figueiredo defeats Montel Jackson via split decision. Montel, 6-fight win streak coming into this matchup, hugely favored, and a lot of people felt he's going to finish Figueiredo quite easily. Is what the tone was before this match, right? 37-year-old Figgy exploded his knee in his matchup with Corey Sandhagen just a couple months ago. In the lead-up to this fight, said that both his jaw and hand were injured in that Sandhagen fight. So you're asking me to think that a undersized bantamweight, right, who's coming up from 125 in the latter half of his UFC career, is also like the most injured version of himself of all time. Right? Basically, what Figueiredo was saying is my skin made of paper, my bones made of glass, and now I'm going up against a guy who's younger, has 7 inches of reach on me, and riding a 6-fight win streak. And most people are saying that Montel Jackson is a dark horse of the division. Of course, people are going to assume that this is Montel's time to shine. And it absolutely was this big showcase moment, right? Hey, Montel, here's a former UFC champion. Here's someone that is pretty highly ranked above you. Style on him and welcome yourself to the top of the division. Maybe there's another big fight after this one, right? And he just sucked. I don't really know any other way to say it. I hate being like that critical, but that's it. And I don't know why, right? It feels like he was uncharacteristically hesitant on the feet, didn't want to let go with the left hand whatsoever, didn't try and implement much grappling. And I get that Davison is, very good at jiu-jitsu, but I don't know. It just would have been nice to see Montel try anything. Would have been nice to see him try anything. And I don't have any positives to say. He was allergic to initiating sequences, had no interest in engaging with combos. It was just single pot shots here and there en route to a decision defeat. I don't know. I don't know what happened to Montel Jackson. Maybe this is just always the version of him. And when you take a step up to the caliber of competition like Davison, it gets exposed in a greater way. Who knows? Maybe it was an off night. I just can't tell. Either way, weird fight. Awesome to see Figueiredo win, right? I love celebrating that, but I was expecting so much more from Montel Jackson, and I think it wasn't just me. I think the fans were as well. A couple other big controversies that I want to get into. 3 big problems that I have with UFC Rio, and we're going to start with Yoel Alvarez. So Yoel Alvarez in his welterweight debut taking on Vicente Luque, who is really in the twilight of his career. A couple years ago, Vicente, revealed that he had a brain bleed, and that's affecting his approach to fighting and seemingly affecting his durability, right? When he fought Joaquin Buckley, he looked incredibly prone to succumbing to the power quite quickly, and most people wanted him to retire at that fight. And that was a couple years ago, right? So I don't know. A finisher like Yoel Alvarez, 100% finishing rate, both KOs and submissions, I think evenly dotting his record. I think people thought he was going to walk right through him, as did I, and it seemed like he was, right? It was a bit of a competitive first round, and then nice shot by Yoel Alvarez seemingly puts Vicente down and out, and then the fight is paused. What? What are we doing here? Osiris Maya, the referee for this matchup, who's, I guess, refereed 249 fights across different promotions, right? So this isn't a guy who is coming in here and this is his first time at the UFC level. Osiris has a lot of experience. But it's just such a weird sequence where Luque, upon instant replay, clearly takes a legal blow. Osiris waves the fight off. He did wave the fight off. And then after some consultation, continues the fight, and we just like pick right up where we left. And that to me is like such an egregious misapplication of the rule set that in big 2025 I don't think that we can necessarily condone. Am I crazy for saying that there should be some sort of a punishment or correction here? Because like, this is why we have instant replay, so that we can clearly see, oh, it's a legal blow. And then the action was stopped unfairly to Yoel because of it. And what only is right is ruling this a TKO as it should have been, right? If the sequence played out like it should have, then Yoel would have TKO'd Vicente Luque in round 1. That gets stolen, and the next 2 rounds are just weird because Yoel Alvarez beats the out of him, doesn't finish him, gets to a unanimous decision. And I think the whole storyline from this one is, what the hell was Osiris Maya thinking? So I don't know. This again harkens back to a lack of transparency, I think, from commissions at times and explaining referees and judges' decisions. I would love if we can move towards that in this sport. I don't understand why we don't have that. I don't understand why there isn't more transparency. There isn't more of a public defense of these decisions. Osiris Maya, I feel like, should have issued some sort of a statement explaining exactly why he did what he did. That, at the very least, could inform, educate audiences to better understand the rules, better understand the mentality of the referees, and create a understanding of these situations as opposed to a knee-jerk reaction of they just robbed Yoel Alvarez and they just misapplied the rule set. And talking about misapplying the rule set, here's a controversy that I would say happened before the event even began. So Lucas Almeida at the weigh-ins clearly had a broken hand. It was swollen like a balloon. You could easily tell it was affecting him. And when the fight plays out with Michael Aswell, doesn't throw whatsoever. Throws jabs, knees, and gets TKO'd quite quickly and easily for Michael Aswell. And so now you've got audiences, astute audiences with keen eyes going, hey, this guy clearly had a broken hand. Why the hell was he allowed to compete at the UFC level, right? That's a injured fighter. He's down a wheel. Why is he competing? And there's not really much of an answer, right? There's not much of an answer. Thinking it's probably Lucas Almeida needs the paycheck, maybe wants to compete in the UFC to then claim that the broken hand came during the fight, and then he could claim and try and get some medical response or surgery that the UFC is liable for. I don't know what the reason was, but it gets weirder because the commission confirms that there was an injury. So here's where it just gets odd. So you've got the Rio Commission that they did do a medical eval prior to the fight, and what they said is he was good to go. And guys, he clearly isn't. Again, we'll toss the injury on screen, but he's clearly got a broken hand, and it doesn't seem fair to allow him to compete. I believe this is what the this CAB MMA commission said. So they reaffirmed its commitment to the physical integrity of athletes and the confidentiality of medical data in accordance with applicable ethical and legal standards. So bit of jargon there. But you have Executive Director Luis Sequeira giving a written statement to MMA Junkie. Sequeira doesn't address Almeida specifically, citing medical confidentiality, but indicated that the fighter was evaluated pre-fight. He says, I'd like to emphasize that all athletes are evaluated before and after fights, strictly following a health and safety protocols established by international sports regulatory standards. So again, bit of jargon there, right? And it's just kind of a bad look. Right? Is it not a bad look to allow a fighter with a clearly broken hand to go out there and try and compete? He's clearly not at 100%. clearly doing this for reasons other than trying to compete and win at the highest level. So some sort of intervention might have been required. And again, we're just left with questions. And talking about questions, the last takeaway from UFC Rio is Simon Oliveira, because I'm just asking myself, what the hell was this guy doing? Showing up 8 pounds overweight, right? He tried to weigh in for a bantamweight contest at 144 pounds. This then becomes a huge catch weight, where on fight night, he can't weigh more than 155, 20 pounds above what he originally signed the dotted line for. This is probably in the top 15, top 20 biggest weight misses in UFC history. This is huge. 8 pounds is a completely different division, right? And doesn't matter. He gets subbed in the second round anyways. But it's interesting because it's like you lose half of your show money and you don't get your win money. So you're probably fighting in the red here. I don't think you made any money by doing this. And it's just a bad look. This is part of the fight game, is making weight. That's a part of your job as a fighter. Showing up 8 pounds overweight is just crazy. I don't get it. And to me, it makes me feel like we got to have some bigger penalties, some more punishment to get these fighters getting their diets in check. I love Kelvin Gastelum, but again, he comes to mind when it comes to weight misses. But talking about misses, let's talk about someone who doesn't miss, right? Paulie Malignaggi, today's guest. Cannot wait for him. You're going to love our interview with him. It's coming up soon, so don't go anywhere here on the Combat Zone. Folks, welcome back to the Combat Zone. Now, Dana White gave every MMA fan a treat the other day by announcing a huge slate of fights for the upcoming events, specifically the final pay-per-view of the year, which is going to take place in Las Vegas. We got the co-main event and the main event, which is Alexandre Pantoja taking on Josh Van and Merab Dvalishvili versus Petr Yan 2 to serve as the effective co-main. This is fantastic, right? This is exactly what fight fans want. They were calling for Josh Van to get the shot after his win over Brandon Royval, and it makes perfect sense. Nothing against the other competitors at 125, but Pantoja is lapping the division, and Josh Van represents a new type of challenger, new blood, and a youngster that could have the opportunity to rewrite history, I believe, by becoming the youngest champion in UFC history. I don't know. I've got to fact check that. I think that's what's at stake here. But talking about stakes, Merab defending his belt for the 4th time in a calendar year. Unprecedented. No UFC champion has done it all in one calendar year. Redefining the bantamweight division, right? We've had so many injuries and lapses of frequency at 135 that I think excitement dulled for a bit, right, towards that division. But Merab Dvalishvili firmly bringing it back to the forefront and being, in my opinion, one of the biggest stars that the UFC has. Certainly the fighter of the year if he's able to beat Petr Yan, which, in my opinion, is quite likely. Nothing against Petr Yan, because I love him as a fighter. I think that what he does in the octagon is great. But the performance he had against Merab, which was only about 3-4 years ago, right, was so lopsided, so lopsided. It's hard for me to think that he has really well and truly and meaningfully addressed the grappling weaknesses. I think Merab's going to do what he wants. I think he's going to style on Petr again, and we'll be treated to some more Merab Dvalishvili celebrating at a Las Vegas nightclub that evening. And I will add this, right? It would be the 4th title defense in a calendar year, which is history-making, but I have to add, Tito Ortiz defended his belt 4 times in a 10-month span across 2 years, right? So, Tito Ortiz, again, somebody that their reputation has dissolved and eroded after, the end of their career and their personality, words, and actions outside of the cage. But he did have this unreal accomplishment as well, and I feel like it's necessary to include that. Other fights that Dana White announced that are appearing on that card and some others: Jan Blachowicz taking on Bogdan Guskov. So Bogdan gets a big top 5 opportunity at light heavyweight. Jan Blachowicz, haven't seen him in action much. He was, at one point in time, a couple years back, a huge star at 205 after defeating Dominic Reyes to become champion, and having pretty memorable fights, I would say. A great back and forth with Magomed Ankalaev at one point. So I don't know. I'm curious. I'm curious to see if Jan can hang on to his position in the top 5. I feel like Bogdan is good. He's powerful, right? That's undeniable. But is he elite? That's the big question. I don't know if he's really proven that. Don't know if he's taken on opponents that would suggest that as well. But talking about elite, this welterweight matchup certainly features two elite members of the 170-pound division, Sean Brady and Michael Morales, locked in for a bout. This is crazy. I mean, Sean Brady could probably just sit on the sidelines following his submission over Leon Edwards and wait for a title shot in the fallout of JDM and Islam Makhachev. But he's saying no. The Philadelphia native wants to add to the streak, and he takes on undefeated knockout artist Michael Morales, Michael Morales has looked unbeatable in his matchups so far in the UFC. At 170, he's got a massive frame, a gargantuan frame for this division, and I'm curious to see what Sean Brady can do, because we're not that far removed from Sean Brady having a really poor display against Bilal Muhammad, right? Bilal boxed him up, showed striking levels. Even when he fought Michael Chiesa, right, a couple years prior, he didn't look that great on the feet, whereas Michael Morales, excellent on the feet. So this, to me, is the biggest opportunity for Sean Brady to show, hey, I have really closed the holes in my gap, and by taking out an undefeated fighter, top-ranked in Michael Morales, to me, that would absolutely solidify his claim to a title shot. Talk about claims to title shots, a couple fighters that are trying to vie back into that golden spotlight, Brandon Moreno and Tatsuro Taira. Interesting bout that's been booked here. I think that, Taira had so much hype, and then following his first setback, got doled a little bit, but now an opportunity against a former multi-time champion. This is great for both fighters. I think Brandon Moreno gets an opportunity to take on a little bit of a younger generation, a newer class in Tatsuro Taira, and if Moreno is able to beat him and remain competitive and still at the top, I wouldn't hate another Brandon Moreno title shot at some point down the line. Obviously, I'm not saying immediately after, but this guy is... he's Teflon Don, You'd think most fighters would have their peaks, their valleys, and the declines, but Moreno, seems to always find a way to bounce back and look better than before. Lastly, a fight that was announced that we have to talk about. I'm like, come on, this is a treat. This is Christmas coming early, guys. Usually we don't have this amount of high-level matchmaking coming out in one single day. Henry Cejudo, Peyton Talbot. So I mentioned about the 135-pound division. Henry Cejudo trying to find that last gasp in his career to get back to the spotlight. And a guy in Peyton Talbot, I honestly think might be perfect for Henry Cejudo. Now, there's going to be a big striking differential. I feel like Peyton's going to be longer, way more selective in the shots, but we're only one fight removed from Raoni Barcelos controlling Peyton Talbot on the ground for the entirety of 3 rounds. Henry Cejudo is an Olympic, wrestler, right? And he's been able to employ his wrestling to great success inside the UFC. So I don't know. I think it's a very interesting fight on paper. And Cejudo, I think, ranked 10th in the division. Peyton Talbot unranked. Big opportunity for Cejudo to remain in the upper areas of bantamweight, and another crack at the top for Peyton Talbot. So I like everything about this fight. I think it's the crossroads for both fighters. If Peyton Talbot is unable to defeat Henry Cejudo, then you do start to ask questions about, okay, well, what exactly do we do here, and what would be his pathway back to the top? Because that's the second time he's been unable to crack into the elite of the division. And I'm not even saying Raoni Barcelos is elite, right? But I don't know. It's just it's a risky fight for Peyton, is what I'm trying to illustrate. And we could be sitting back going, ooh, we mishandled that prospect. And talking about mishandling, BJ Penn, the legal woes continue. A judge orders a mental health exam to see if BJ Penn is mentally fit for the charges against him, which includes, abuse of a family member, refusing to comply with a police officer, and violating a temporary restraining order. So here's an exact quote from a legal analyst, Gina Gormley. She says, with the fitness to proceed examinations, the examiner is trying to determine whether or not the person, the individual, understands what they're being accused of or what they're being charged with, and then also whether or not they can assist in their own defense, right? Gina's not affiliated or associated with any of BJ Penn's cases, but just analyzing this situation. And if the doctor determines that Penn's fit to proceed, the criminal case will continue. If Penn is deemed not fit to proceed, he will be committed to the custody of the state and placed in an appropriate facility for treatment, which is it's a seriously sad situation that highlights the aftermath of one's competitive career, right? BJ Penn absorbed a ton of damage in the latter half of his UFC tenure and combat sports tenure, and it's showing. And this is absolutely, I would say, signs of, CTE or some cognitive decline, and it's sad. I know that, there's a lot of people online that are maybe mocking the situation or ridiculing it, but it really is a in real time case study of the negative effects of what this sport can do to somebody. And I've long been advocating for BJ to find assistance in the form of, commitment to a facility, whether that's, a psychiatric, a mental hospital, something, just to surround him with professionals that can best treat and maybe address what's going on internally. Him being left to his own devices clearly wasn't helping. We've seen so many posts from him to Instagram that are claiming, his family was captured by the CIA and replaced with people trying to harm him, and just out of this world stuff that, again, people mock online and find humor in, but it really is a sad case and a cry for help that hopefully gets addressed. I don't think anyone wants to see BJ be a further harm to himself or others, and what might just be best is surrounding him with mental health professionals that can really analyze and assist in giving BJ what he needs, because clearly he's not getting it. So sad note there, but we will end today's section of interesting news on a bit of a happier note. So why am I on the road, right? I'm up here in Las Vegas doing Fight Circus. Now, if you know Fight Circus, it's a global combat sports phenomenon based in Phuket, Thailand, and it's done some of the wackiest fights you've ever seen, putting a literal phone booth inside the boxing ring and having fighters compete within it, right? Phone booth fighting, putting a tarp on top of a boxing ring, lubing it up with jelly and having heavyweights box on it. It's ice fighting, penalty box fighting, right? Crazy stuff that you just don't see other combat sports promotions doing. It is kind of like the Savannah Bananas of combat sports, which is great. I love it. I've done 2 shows with them the last couple of years, and they are just they're up in the ante every single time. And this weekend is their U.S. debut, right? So we're at the Palms Casino and Resort. We're doing Friday and Saturday evening. We have got a massive slate of fights that I think are going to be entertaining for the fans. I wish I could provide you guys with a link or some place to watch it, but I don't know exactly the distribution. However, when I find out, I will update on the programming. And next week, we'll have a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of exclusive videos that I will be taking with my iPhone of both the rehearsal process and the fight night, backstage experience, because this is it's a circus. It literally is a circus. We've got a ton of acts, a ton of, interstitials in between fights. We've got hip hop dancers. We've got DJs. We've got drummers. I believe Matt Brown is doing some guitar solos, right? So former UFC legend getting in there and ripping the sticks. I love it. I love everything about what Fight Circus is up to, and I think that there's a hole in the marketplace, and Fight Circus perfectly fills it. So I'll let you guys know next week how it all unfolds. Hopefully I come bearing good news. And talking about good news, let's turn the conversation of today's programming back to our guest. It's Paulie Malignaggi, former boxing champion, BKB on-air talent. He's returning to the ring October 18th in Leeds, United Kingdom, and some very interesting reasons why, and a bit of a hint that this isn't a one and done. So let's welcome into the Combat Zone booth our good friend, Paulie Malignaggi.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a special guest we have entering the Combat Zone booth. He is a former 2-division world champion, has taken on the likes of Miguel Cotto, Amir Khan, Adrian Broner, the late Ricky Hatton, and many more. It's Paulie Malignaggi. Paulie, welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm fantastic. We have got to get into this. Leeds, October 18th. It's the return against a pretty well-seasoned veteran in Tyler Goodjohn. What has inspired this return to competition for you, Paulie?
I think there's several things. One thing is that I think if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it again. I've been fighting it all for a few years. I even had a couple of offers that I turned away to return to combat. And then, you get to this age and you still feel pretty good, but you're like, if I don't scratch this itch now, I'll never be able to scratch it again, So do I want the ship to sail completely, or do I want to at least be able to look back and say, hey, you know what, I gave it one last shot, you know? So it was like I looked at it and I said, you know, can I really be competitive on a world-class championship boxing level? Fighting 10, 12 rounds is kind of heavy at this age, you know? So I said, you know, I've worked a lot with BKB. I did one bare knuckle fight in the past. They're shorter, so they're less. I feel like they're less demanding on your legs more than anything else, because I think, you know, to go that many rounds it gets heavier on your legs, and when you're older, those kind of give away a little bit. So I feel like you know, the shorter duration of bare knuckle fights was the way to go, you know, and it was. And then as far as with BKB, you know, I've been working with them for a long time. They've been very good to me, and I wanted to, you know, maybe help them grow just as they are giving me the opportunity. So I feel like it can be mutually beneficial. And then as far as the rugged veteran and Tyler Goodjohn, picking the opponent was something that I wanted. So I wanted it to be a respectful opponent. You know, I didn't want to come in and say I'm going to use my profile to just jump the line and maybe get a title fight, which, you know, we've heard guys like Conor McGregor tease that in BKFC with his involvement. And, you know, I wouldn't want to do that, because these guys work very hard, and I commentate the fights, and I see how hard those guys work, trying to work their way through the rankings, trying to get their title shots. So I said, you know what, I need to, at least before getting a title fight, before asking for a title fight, I need to at least, you know, take on somebody who has a respectable profile within the sport. And Tyler Goodjohn, for me, stood out, both in what he's accomplished, and having been a pioneer for the sport in bare knuckle, having had his share of fights, having had his share of classic fights at that, and being a well-known bare knuckle fighter. So, you know, so that's where that went. As far as other things, you know, I eventually want to move back to Sicily, you know, later on in my life. So I need to pay down. I need to pay down some mortgages, man. I got some. You know, what's funny is they tell you to, you know, invest your money and do this and do this, and then you do it, and you're like, man, now I got roots here, and I can't really
Yeah,
move.
can't leave.
I got to maneuver. I don't want to just give everything up without being
Yeah.
compensated for it, you know? So I got to, you know, pay down some mortgages and whatnot. So this will help that as well. You know, maybe a run, you know, a little fighting run might do that. I'm not here for a long time. I'm here for a good time. So it's possible for me to do it that way. So, you know, it's really been about you know, for myself, scratching the itch, helping BKB because they've been great to me, and yeah, maybe making some money to pay down some of the liability/assets that I've got.
Like you
Right.
said, mutually beneficial, all parties winning in this one. And I like that professionalism you display by saying I'm not gonna ask for someone at the top. I'm gonna, you know, allow myself to work there a little bit. But that does kind of speak to me, Paulie, that this isn't a one and done. There might be, like you said, a run, a title shot with a victory.
Yeah, that's why I say I'm not here for a long time. I mean, I'm not here for a long time. I'm here for a good time. I do want to have a short run here, and go for it. You know, if things work out, of course, you take it one at a time. Here's one thing there's been a difference in my mentality training for this fight as opposed to training for other fights in my career. You know, obviously I've had a lot of big fights, and it's always the aura surrounding the opponent you're fighting and the promotion and so on and so forth. And yeah, to a degree, it's that here as well. It's always about that to a degree, but more so because I haven't fought in a long time. I haven't really focused a lot on Goodjohn, and haven't really focused a lot on the opposition in general. Obviously, I've focused a little bit on it. I can't say I've just totally ignored it. That would be ignorant. But it's been mostly about my own focus on myself, getting the best out of myself at this age, focus on being the best I can be at this age, adjusting the training at this age, and being smart, working, you know, the old cliche, working smarter, not harder. Well, what is smarter and what is harder at this age?
Yeah.
It kind of varies depending on each individual person, and each individual person's body, and what they can and can't take, and what they can and can't do, you know? So I've made adjustments as well there, and you know, we kind of worked our way into shape, into fighting shape, and you know, there's some things that I can do and some things that I don't do, you know, that I used to do, and then some things I do less of and some things I do more of, you know. But overall, it's been I feel like we've worked in a lot smarter sense and getting the best out of myself, and I feel like that's sort of part of the winning here is getting the best out of myself. If I get the best out of myself, then, you know, whatever version of me shows up against Goodjohn, I think it'll be ready to compete and ready to, you know, give my best effort, and you know, plan on winning the fight, obviously. But I'm not really focused on a lot on the opposition in general.
Yeah.
I wanted the opposition to be respectful, and that's where that's where Goodjohn comes into play. But if I think about Tyler instead of thinking about myself, I think I get lost in the shuffle at this point in my life. I think at this point in my life, it was very important to sort of, you know, reel everything in emotionally and physically, and just put myself in a situation where I'm concentrating on the right things. And for me, I felt like that was the concentration on the proper things, and in order to prepare for this fight.
Great stuff from Paulie Malignaggi. So much more coming from him on today's piece of programming. So don't go anywhere. We'll see you next on the Combat Zone. Folks, welcome back to the Combat Zone. Today we have an incredibly special guest with us who's making some time ahead of his return to the ring. Paulie Malignaggi, the former boxing world champion, embracing combat once more at the age of 44. Let's take it back to our friend, Paulie Malignaggi.
The differences in preparation at 44 versus 24 have got to be worlds different. Is there any maybe specifics you can provide about, at this age, what I've had to change, or maybe some of those tactics you mentioned?
One of the things, the main thing I think has been when I was younger, we used to have long drawn out workouts. The workouts lasted longer. There were various workouts, but they would drag longer, and they would really exhaust you. But, with proper rest and proper dieting and proper everything else, you could recover because your body is young and it springs back up, as long as you treat it correctly. Even if you're not treating it correctly, even at a younger age, eventually you pay for it. But I always was responsible in that way, especially during training camps. At this age, if you drag it out like that, drag your body through the mud like that through a workout, constantly drag long out workouts consistently day in and day out, no matter how good you are to yourself, diet-wise, rest-wise, your body doesn't recover the same way. So what we've done several workouts a day. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3. None of them last longer than 40 minutes. Most of them are between 25 and 30. There's one that lasts 40 minutes. So nothing is lasting longer, but they are all fast-paced. The 40-minute one is there's half of it is fast-paced, half of it is slower-paced. Obviously, some of it involves boxing, some of it involves some conditioning stuff, and some of it involves some strength. It's various workouts, and some of them intercede each other. But the trick has been to sort of get myself to uncomfortable points, but not drag it out, because you have to get yourself uncomfortable in order to prepare for combat. So you have to put yourself in we've done because they're shorter workouts. They've been focused on fast pace. So that way, these fights tend to be fast paced fights to begin with, right? And that can be uncomfortable if you're not used to it, right? Especially if you haven't been out of combat for several years. So we focus on tighter, shorter workouts at a fast pace, just to, be mentally and psychologically ready to deal with becoming comfortable being uncomfortable, in that kind of atmosphere. And I think that has been good. We haven't been able to spar as much. I used to spar ridiculously a lot. When I was younger, I used to spar every 2 days in camp. I used to try to get at least 125, 150 rounds of sparring per training camp at the minimum. Wow. So I was heavy into violent physical sparring, because I felt like that got my mind ready and also my body ready and my sharpness ready. I hasn't been able to been as much sparring because your body doesn't recover. The young guy can spar 2 days later. The guy like me, I'm still beat up.
A couple days. Yeah.
Even if you do well in sparring, it's still physically debilitating. So we've had to do a little bit less sparring. And like I said, we've focused more on some other facets of the training that at a faster pace, at a quicker pace, and also some nervous system training when it comes to the strength conditioning, nervous system training, reactive stuff like that. Because you want to get that the springs and the fascia muscles in your body working. So I think, listen, we'll see on fight night. I think we've done a good job. I think we have. Yeah. I feel good. It's different. And like I said, I've not focused a lot on the opponent, but I focus a lot on myself. And as far as if I focus on myself, I feel very confident. I feel in what I've done. So, I'm excited.
You mentioned the previous bare knuckle bout that you had with Artem Lobov, BKFC, and that one was layered with, I would say, the promotion of it, right, was quite big, and there was a lot of going, back and forth trash talk. What were some of your takeaways from that first bare knuckle bout that you feel you're applying into this one?
The main takeaway, I think, is that, we focus a lot on, speaking of a training, we focus a lot on closing the hands properly. In boxing, a boxing glove, you tend to train and you don't always close your hand well, especially with the way you wrap your hands in a boxing glove. You close your hand maybe at 80%, 75%, and you get away with it because you have a glove protecting you. So one of the things we did in this camp, we worked with MMA gloves instead of boxing gloves. That way, it forces you more to close the glove, close your hand, make a fist. And sometimes we worked barehanded, of course, but not the whole camp because otherwise the hands wouldn't last through the camp. Especially, matter of fact, during camp, there's a point I jammed my thumb. So we focused more with the MMA glove because we wanted to, make me feel that the hand needs to be closed properly. Otherwise, the fist is gonna, hurt, or it's gonna, not make it the proper impact. So we focus a lot on that, which I hadn't focused on much in the low ball fight. In the low ball fight, I trained the entire camp with 8-ounce gloves. They're 8-ounce pro fight gloves, pro boxing gloves. And the pro boxing glove, you still can get away with not closing the hand. So when we took the gloves off in the fight, we had an issue. When I loaded up on that big right hand, I hit him on the forehead. I think the hand would have broke regardless if I closed it because I hit him on the forehead. But my hand broke, and so then I had to fight in a way where you're fighting a bit more cerebrally. And, I'd say no offense, but I really don't care if anybody gets offended. This isn't the fan base nor the media that can really pay attention to a cerebrally high intellect fight plan. This is more you just fight, and that's all they understand. They're not in the least bit educated enough. As a matter of fact, even if as long as you're coming forward, even if you get beat up, like happened with Lobov, essentially, Ford walked into punches all night. Even if I was one-handed, he basically just walked into my punches all night. He boxed. He wasn't able to brawl. The fact that the fight remained a boxing match showed that I was in control, showed that I was dictating the fight even one-handed, because it wasn't his choice to box, that's for sure. He would have wanted to brawl. I never allowed him to brawl except for that one clinch he got me into. So I felt like I fully controlled that fight regardless of it being one-handed. The biggest takeaway I took was, properly closing my hands, and I'm dealing with a very dumbed down sports fan and a very dumbed down media. As a matter of fact, after the fight, I remember that I felt like I'd been robbed. And I spoke about that in the post-fight interview. But then in the post-fight press conference, I was just so tired. It was a long combat sports career. I had dealt with some politics in the past of being robbed and stuff like that. That I didn't go as crazy in the post-fight press conference as maybe I could have in the past. Because I just felt like, this was so obvious that I won that I'll just let the media deal with the robbery, and then they'll write about it and they'll do their job, because I'm just too tired to even argue about this crap anymore. I'm so sick of it, And then the next day, I realized, first of all, no boxing media covered it except boxingscene.com, which had me winning the fight. Only MMA media covered it. And I could not believe what they wrote. Like, they basically didn't think it was a bad decision. They thought they didn't mention the handbrake. Most of them didn't. They talked about how, basically he pressured me, and they made it like he won the fight and made like he controlled the fight and all that. I could not believe what I was reading. I was like, wow. I was like, these people, I knew they were stupid, but I didn't realize they could supersede in my already very low expectation of them, So at this point, I was like, whatever, it's done. I'm tired of it, and that was it, So I think you take into account a couple of things. I fought a lefty in that fight, and every lefty is a little bit different. So I started that fight very tactically, but I started that fight tactically aggressive. And then I planned to just up the aggression as the fight wore on. The power right hand, I broke it. So therefore I had to go to a plan B, which was fight and retreat while using fight on the back foot while using your lead hand, which I did. I thought like I jabbed and I check hooked very well. He was off balance and clumsy, and for the most part I controlled him. I felt like that was the way I did it that fight, but every lefty, like I said, is a little bit different. So I started even though I started aggressively, I still started a little bit more cerebrally than I would usually start. I feel like with Tyler, he's a right-hander, I'm a right-hander. There's not really a need to, try to fight so cerebrally. We both know how to fight very well. I feel like my focus on closing my hands is going to come into play here, and I feel like having two hands allows me to throw obviously two-handed combinations that I was not able to throw in the first fight, And in reality, you can get into exchanges when you have two hands. You can't get into exchanges when you have one hand. So one hand, the entire game plan B for the Lobo fight was to avoid exchanges, pick him off and step out of the pocket, pick him off and step out of the pocket, pick him off and not allow him to get off as the shots he wants or not allow him to land the shots he wants, which again, I felt like I did. I felt like I was in and I was out. I was in, I was out picking him off more so than he was able to do anything with me. While, when you have two hands, you can exchange or you can pick them off. You have more options, and your hand speed comes into play. Obviously, the health of your hands has to remain there. But I'm confident in my hands because I'm confident in the way I've been closing my hands in camp, and it's something we really worked on. So I'm confident in all that. So again, there's various reasons why I'm confident going in. But like I said, all of it has more focus on me. It's not really focusing on anything else. Not really focusing on the media, the fans, Tyler himself. Obviously the Tyler will be in front of me, so there'll be time to focus on him on fight night. But overall, it's been more of an internal focus on me.
I love that. And to your point, thankfully, very few people have accused MMA media and MMA fans of being intelligent. So, it's not really not a huge shock, right? Their feelings that night.
Nor do I expect that to change.
Yeah, no, it won't.
Much more left on today's episode with Paulie Malignaggi, so don't change the channel at all. We'll be right back here on the Combat Zone. Folks, welcome back to the Combat Zone. October 18th, we see former boxing champion Paulie Malignaggi return to the ring after years of working as on-air talent, being outside of it, being next to the action. Now he's getting back into it. Let's take it back to Paulie Malignaggi.
I do want to dig deeper into a prior opponent of yours. November 2008, you took on Ricky Hatton in a deeply memorable affair. What was your first reaction to hearing his passing?
Very shocked. I spoke to Ricky a couple of months back when I was in the UK, when we first announced the Good John fight. Ricky was there, but he was leaving town. He was going to Dubai, so I didn't get to link up with him. I spoke to him on the phone, and he sounded in pretty good spirits, and he let me know, hey, listen, if you want to use the gym, I got you. Just let me know, and I'll have the guys set it up for you, and you can use it privately if you want. It's I'm whatever you need, Paulie, let me know. I didn't take him up on his offer because I was busy that week and whatnot, and he was leaving for Dubai anyway. Maybe if he was there, I would have maybe went to see him. But he seemed like in good spirits on his way to Dubai. And he told me he couldn't share what he was going to Dubai about, but I would find out soon. It was something he was working on that he couldn't be open about. And then a couple of days later, when I returned to the U.S., I read that he was going to fight again. He had signed a fight in Dubai. Maybe they were paying him good money to fight this prospect. So I got a little bit worried because Ricky's post-fight career, he hadn't exactly lived as healthily as I have.
Yeah.
My vices basically. I like to eat. All other vices, I either don't have or I've pretty much kicked them. So I just like to eat. So I did have to lose weight, but other than that, I'm not a person that has vices like that. But Ricky has had to battle some inner demons and whatnot. So plus he's 2 years older than me. So I was a little worried when I found that he was fighting. So I did some due diligence, and I was basically told by people on the inside that, this isn't really a difficult fight. It's a guy that they're pushing in Dubai. And honestly, if Ricky is even a piece of his old self, he still knocks this guy out even at his age. So I was happy because I was like, oh, it's great because Rick is probably going to make a boatload of money to come out of retirement and do this fight. And it's not a risk to him. So this is why it was basically a shock. I know Ricky has struggled with things in the past, but I thought that at the moment in time, he would be focused on this, and he wouldn't and there wouldn't be the risk of this or any of this happening. So I don't know what happened. I'm not on the inside, but I'll tell you this. One thing I've learned here, mental health obviously is a real thing. I think a lot of people take advantage of it in terms of everybody who's unhappy decides that they're mentally unhealthy or they need mental help. And I really vehemently get aggravated with that because there are people that genuinely need the help. And so when you do that, you take away possible help that the people who genuinely need to get, and then the possible help from them. Being a miserable fuck doesn't mean you're mentally unstable or you're depressed or you're suicidal. There are people that have legitimately that problem that need that help. So you need to let those people truly get the help. But it's hard to decipher it when somebody complains because you can't really diagnose it. It's just hearing, it's just hearsay. So that's why I feel like people really need to be more honest about this because you're taking away the help from people that truly need it. Rick had these issues, but one thing I learned is this: people always say, "Oh, check on your loved ones because you never know, right? Check on the people you care about. Check on the people you know, whatever. You never know." Obviously, I was friendly with Ricky since we fought, but we're on two different sides of the world. It's not like he wasn't a guy that I spoke to a
Yeah.
lot, but I did get to know him pretty well over a certain part of my life. And I know he had a very loving family and people around him loved him very much. And he had a loving fan base.
Cannot thank Paulie Malignaggi enough for the time ahead of his return to the ring at BKB. Make sure you tune into it right here on Bally's Stadium. You do not want to miss that one. And huge thank you to the fans for watching today's episode of Combat Zone. Every week, 10 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. Mark the calendars. Make sure you put it in your required viewing because next week we've got a fun one in store. I've been your host, Ben the Bane Davis. Thank you so much for the time, and we'll see you next week on the Combat Zone.